Okay, first I'm going to read the prompt to you, and then I'm just going to talk to you for a few minutes about the things that I would annotate or things that I would notice during my first read. Read the following passage from America Needs Its Nerds by Leonid Fridman. Then write an essay in which you analyze how Fridman develops his argument. Again, remember they're not asking your opinion on the argument. They're asking you to analyze how he develops his argument. There is something very wrong with the system of values in a society that has only derogatory terms like nerd and geek for the intellectually curious and academically serious. A geek, according to Webster's New World Dictionary, is a street performer who shocks the public by biting off heads of live chickens. It is a telling fact about our language and our culture that someone dedicated to pursuit of knowledge is compared to a freak biting the head off a live chicken. Even at a prestigious academic institution like Harvard, anti-intellectualism is rampant. Many students are ashamed to admit, even to their friends, how much they study. Although most students try to keep up their grades, there is a minority of undergraduates for whom pursuing knowledge is the top priority during their years at Harvard. Nerds are ostracized while athletes are idolized. The same thing happens in U.S. elementary and high schools. Children who prefer to read books rather than play football, prefer to build model airplanes rather than get wasted at parties with their classmates, become social outcasts, ostracized for their intelligence and refusal to conform to society's anti-intellectual values. Many are deprived of a chance to learn adequate social skills and acquire good communication tools. Enough is enough. Nerds and geeks must stop being ashamed of who they are. It is high time to face the persecutors who haunt the bright kid with thick glasses from kindergarten to the grave. For America's sake, the anti-intellectual values that pervade our society must be fought. There are very few countries in the world where anti-intellectualism runs as high in popular culture as it does in the U.S. In most industrialized nations, not least of all our economic rivals in East Asia, a kid who studies hard is lauded and held up as an example to other students. In many parts of the world, university professorships are the most prestigious and materially rewarding positions, but not in America, where average professional ball players are much more respected and better paid than faculty members of the best universities. How can a country where typical parents are ashamed of their daughter studying mathematics instead of going dancing, or of their son reading Weber while his friends play baseball, be expected to compete in the technology race with Japan or remain a leading political and cultural force in Europe? How long can America remain a world-class power if we constantly emphasize social skills and physical prowess over academic achievement and intellectual ability? So when I read this, I'd actually start at the end because those two rhetorical questions draw the reader in. Again, identifying that they are rhetorical questions isn't enough. You also need to articulate what then is the response that the audience has. What is the effect on the audience? Going back to the piece overall, usually the first thing I look for is a shift, a change either in tone or in structure. And if you look, really the first column and the second column have that shift. It happens around line 28. When the author says enough is enough. This is a great example when you use one short sentence as opposed to a big paragraph. You can even visually see that something is going to change. It has an impact on the reader. The author starts by talking about the terms nerd and geek. Those are really inflammatory terms. They have a strong connotation to them, a feeling. Either people are on the side of mocking people and using those terms that way, or they're on the side of perhaps being mocked by those terms. So I think it's a way to engage the audience. Notice that as the author continues, the author talks about our country and our society. So that immediately brings the reader in. It's not like we're just reading about something that is separate from us. Instead, we're reading about something that is part of us, especially in paragraph 2. It is a telling fact about our language and our culture. So I think that's important as well, because the author is trying to get us all on the same page. Using the example of the freak biting the head off a live chicken is evoking pathos. It's that emotional response. But then the author moves to why this is so detrimental. He starts with a more emotional appeal and then gets into the nitty-gritty of the argument, talking about how those who are involved in reading and studying are also those who could compete against other countries. And I think that's really what happens in the second half. We go from a little bit more abstract and emotional appeals suddenly to feeling like, wait a minute, this is something that is hurting our nation. First, it's hurting individuals, and that's really important, but it's also hurting our country as a whole. And then bringing in those comparisons to the other countries definitely drives home the point that this is a problem. And the author really states that right in the beginning. That first sentence, there is something very wrong with the system of values in a society that has only derogatory terms. So the author's presenting the point immediately. There's no space for the reader to have to work to figure it out. You'll notice in this article, you don't see extended metaphors or very flowery language. The language is very straightforward, which invites anyone in to understand it. This is not meant to be a highly academic essay. Rather, it should be one that people understand for the most part. So the audience is broad, but I would argue the audience would be people who could influence what happens in schools and in education, because the author is really focusing on that world. Does bullying happen outside of that world? Absolutely. But he's speaking more about what happens in elementary and middle and high school and college, because that's an environment where learning should really be at the forefront and should not be a dangerous or outcast activity. The one thing I would say, there definitely are generalizations towards the beginning, but I think he cinches those generalizations, or he really tightens them up when he gets more specific in that second column. And again, this is not a time to say whether you think it's a good argument or not. You're simply analyzing how he develops it, and that's really key. When you write your essay, you need to make sure to include the author's name and the title of the piece right at the beginning. It doesn't have to be in your first sentence, but it should be up there. And then finally, again, I would make a nod to the rhetorical questions. I think they definitely build in terms of the impact of what this problem could be. He says it pretty plainly, but at the end when he says, how long can America remain a world-class power, there's an immediacy there. He doesn't provide a call to action, but definitely there's an implied call to action. What can we do? What will happen if we don't act on this? Now I'd like you to head to the student examples. There are 3 involved on the next step, and they range from really great to kind of lacking. My hope in looking at these student samples is if you're stressed or nervous about writing one, the best one is good for sure, but the readers understand that you only have 40 minutes to write this essay, so they're not expecting perfection. They're expecting specifics. And on the flip, when you look at the weaker essay, my hope is that you can find some pitfalls and things that you would not want to do on your own.